This week on Engage the Sage.
Hi everyone, I'm Don Saucier. Welcome to this week's episode of Engage the Sage. This week, I'm going to talk to you about why you should not complain about your students on social media. Let's face it, students are not always perfect, but neither are we. Students don't always do what they should. Students don't always make great decisions. Students sometimes complain to us about stuff they shouldn't complain about, and I get that this is frustrating. But while this is frustrating, I'm going to try to convince you today that you should not complain about that frustration on social media. First, I want you to remember that the students you'd be complaining about are actually not many of your students. There's only a very few students that actually create this frustration for us. Most of our students are trying to do the right things in our class. Most of our students are trying to do the assignments the way we want them to do them. Most of our students are trying to attend class. Most of our students are trying to do the right thing. And when they can't, it's often because they can't due to some situational factors, not because they don't want to. So I think when we're experiencing that frustration, we should try to be a little bit empathetic to think about what is producing that frustration. What is producing the student behavior that's maybe suboptimal? And maybe it's not them actually trying to actively annoy us. The second thing I want you to think about is that complaining on social media does not solve anything. If you go on social media and complain about your students frustrating you, it doesn't change the fact that your students are frustrating you, and it doesn't create a solution to the problem that you're actually raising. If you actually want to use social media in a fruitful and productive way, it might be to crowdsource a particular solution to an issue you might be experiencing. So rather than just putting up a complaint about your students and saying, oh, my students never come to class, you could actually rephrase that to something productive and say, hey, I've noticed some of my students aren't attending class. What do you all do to inspire your students to attend? What do you do to make that class valuable for your students? This is a very different conversation you're starting. The third thing I want you to remember is that complaining about your students on social media is just not a good look for you as a teacher. When we think about the teachers that we aspire to be, when I think about trying to bring peace to my classes, that preparation, that expertise, that authenticity, that caring and engagement, when I think about infusing empathy into my class, all of those are completely inconsistent with saying bad things about students on social media. If I or if you were to go and complain about our students on social media, it's kind of putting it out there that maybe we don't like students. Maybe we don't like teaching. Maybe those ideals that we want to kind of have be part of our teaching philosophy and practices aren't really our ideals. And that would be something that'd be a problem for me. Further, if we want to think pragmatically, all of us have a digital footprint. If you are complaining about your students on social media, someone might find that. You might be applying for a job, an award or something. Someone finding that is not going to help you out. So maybe not creating that digital footprint to find in the first place would be a good idea. You do not want a permanent digital record because of an impulsive statement you made about your students in a moment of frustration. Fourth thing I want you to consider, complaining about our students on social media, this is not empathy. We don't know why our students do the things that they do. And making these kind of dispositional attributions, saying that this is the essence of their person, rather than a situational attribution, this is something that their situation is creating for them, that might be a mistake. And to do this at all, or even often, is something that is not going to make us feel better about teaching those students. I will also say we've sometimes been guilty of this in our own past. We've sometimes done the things that have created frustration for others. I know I probably was a source of frustration for some of my professors along the way, so this is something I try to give myself students a little bit of a pass on if I can. Fifth thing I want you to keep in mind is you don't want to complain about your students on social media because they might find out about it. As I've kind of mentioned before, this is not supportive behavior. This is not productive behavior. And if our students were to find out we're saying these kind of things, it might change our ability to actually interact with our students and produce a situation that's going to support their learning and success. If you complain about an individual student and you provide any sort of information that tracks it back to that student, you might be in violation of FERPA or other confidentiality agreements that you are beholden to as a professor. The sixth thing that I want you to keep in mind is that rather than complaining on social media about your students, talk to someone in private if you have an issue. Best case scenario, you post a social media post saying that you're frustrated with your students and your students are awful and all of these kind of things. Maybe a couple people like it. Maybe a couple people then are baited into talking bad about their students too. That's not a great situation. That's not a great best case scenario. It is okay to be frustrated sometimes. It's possibly unavoidable to be frustrated sometimes. And your feelings are valid. And you should have the opportunity to work through those feelings. But do it with a colleague. Do it with a significant other. Do it with a friend. Do it with someone in a private atmosphere who knows you, who trusts you, who can listen, who can give you advice if that's what you want, but don't do it publicly over social media to the virtual world. Seventh thing I want you to consider is that when we have these moments of frustration, focus on other ways to make yourself feel fulfilled. If you are having the impulse to put up a negative post about your students on social media, you're probably in a bad place in that moment. You probably need a pick-me-up. So I'm telling you, find yourself a pick-me-up. Find yourself a way to feel validated and fulfilled in your job or even elsewhere. What I try to do is think about, as I said earlier, a student that might frustrate me might be a student. There may be other students in that class, many other students in that class who are doing it right. I'm going to focus on them. I'm going to focus about their efforts to learn. I'm going to focus on their wonderful demonstrations of learning. I will sometimes take out my CV and look through it and look at the things that I've done in my career. I might read my teaching philosophy and get an idea of the things that are important to me as a teacher. I might read some pieces that I've written. I might watch some Engage the Sage videos. I might do something that reminds me of the fulfillment that I take in teaching when I experience frustration. I want to reassert that we've all been there. We've all been in situations where a student has done something to annoy us. We've all been in situations where we've been frustrated by something our students have done. And I think there are better ways to handle it than posting a negative comment on social media. What I'm going to recommend, and it's not easy, is when you're frustrated by your students, remind yourself that you want to be a teacher who's empathetic, who's supportive, and who supports your students' learning and success. And that most of your students are doing right in your course. In the comments below, I would love to hear any recommendations you have for how we can deal with this frustration that sometimes students will create without posting on social media. Thank you for watching this episode of Engage the Sage. Please like, subscribe, sign up for notifications, share us on social media, and we'll see you next time on Engage the Sage.